Good morning. It's great to see everyone this morning, and I am especially grateful to be here this morning. As I'm sure many of you have kind of struggled with, either in your family or with yourself, there's ailments going around this time of year, and as of about noon yesterday, I was kind of like on the back end of a sickness, and I wasn't sure if I was actually even going to be here. And I thought Lawrence might have to cover for me this morning, but I am especially grateful to be here after that and to see all of you this morning, knowing that I might have missed out on what we've gotten to be a part of already and the beautiful singing. This has been really special. I want to start this morning by sharing something that I came across a while back. I haven't read the series, but it's a story about a series of novels that was written by a woman named Dorothy Sayers. Now, Dorothy Sayers was a very well-known writer in the early 1900s in England. And she was one of the first women to go through Oxford, had a very successful career, and she wrote a series of mystery novels about a detective named Peter Wimsey. And Peter Wimsey became kind of an iconic figure from what I understand during that time. He became very well known. And as a result, Dorothy Sayers also became very well known. And she continued this series. I forget how many there are. But what's interesting is about halfway through the series, a woman appears. I think her name is Harriet Vane. And Harriet Vane comes onto the scene. She was one of the first women to make it through Oxford. And she also was a writer of mystery novels. And what happens in the series is Harriet Vane meets Peter Wimsey. They fall in love and they live happily ever after, or something like that. But before Harriet came into his life, Peter Wimsey evidently was pretty sad or had something missing. Like something was incomplete, even though he had this successful career and he was a very well-known detective in this fantasy world. His life was not complete until Harriet came into the story. And it's been pointed out by many people, and maybe you recognized in me just trying to recap that story, that if you're paying attention, what you realize is Dorothy Sayers actually wrote herself into the story. She is the one who made it through Oxford and is the detective of these mystery novels, and there are other parallels, but people recognize that what happened is Dorothy Sayers saw Peter Wimsey, this character that she had created, this world that she had made, and realized that there was something that was incomplete, and she wrote herself into the story. And I think that's a beautiful picture of the gospel, right? God, the author of life, the one who spoke this world into being, wrote himself into our story by coming down from heaven, being born into the world. And what we want to look at this morning, beginning this morning and over the next few weeks, is a series about just this, focusing on this moment when the angel Gabriel comes to Mary, this moment in which God wrote himself into the story of humanity, the moment that we're calling for the purpose of this series, heaven came down. Heaven came down. And I can't take credit for this artwork. Y'all know my artistic abilities. Brianna created this. It looks really good. But this is what we'll be in for the next few weeks, a series on heaven came down, this interaction of Gabriel coming with this amazing news to this young woman named Mary. Now, to be clear, God was never not a part of our story, right? He was there from beginning to end. In fact, he has no beginning or end. He is the eternal author of existence. He is the creator and sustainer of life, and he is on every chapter, on every page, and every line of our story. He is the ever-present God. And yet, we find this particular moment. We have recorded for us this particular moment when the Son of God was born into the world, when God did write himself into our story in a very particular way, the moment when heaven came down. And the question that I think that should raise in our minds is, it's the question that Mary asked the angel Gabriel, or asked to herself when the angel Gabriel appeared to her in Luke 1 and verse 29, when it says that she was greatly troubled at this news, and she wondered what sort of greeting this might be. And we'll get to that greeting in a moment. We'll look at this story. But within her wondering, I think we find the question that we should all be asking, and that is, what might this be? Right? What's the significance of this moment? What does all this mean for us today? And to answer that question, I want to start with this. It may not be hard for any of us this morning to imagine moments of life when God seems distant. When God seems distant. Maybe even just seeing those words pop up on the screen, it takes you to a specific moment, to a specific time and place or a feeling. The times when God seems far away. Maybe it is the loss of someone close to you. Maybe it was during COVID, that feeling of loneliness and isolation, and maybe you just still are kind of stumbling through that, finding your way out of all of the confusion that was. Maybe it was when you were searching for a job, or you felt trapped in debt, or you realized that the plans that you thought God had for your life were starting to fall apart around you. Or maybe it was a season in which you struggled with anxiety and depression, or maybe it wasn't one particular moment, but it was just a combination of things, the compilation of things that happen to us in life, the things that are on the news and going on in our world, and problems with family and problems within your own personal life and world and interior struggles. And maybe sometimes it's just the inexplicable things that you just take one day after another, and throughout the grind of life, all of a sudden you wake up one morning and all of a sudden God just seems so far away. And things seem dark and confusing. And maybe the joy and the peace that you once had is gone. Maybe the justice and righteousness that you felt you were experiencing in life had gone away, that things weren't going right, that things didn't seem fair. And maybe you start to wonder whether or not God is really with you and that he's really going to come through on his promises. And if you can locate that space in your minds this morning, then you can start to imagine where the nation of Israel, where Mary's people were at, what they were experiencing when the angel Gabriel came down. See, going all the way back to the promise that God made to Abraham, Israel was supposed to be the nation that was highly favored by God. They were chosen among all of the peoples, and they were chosen for a specific task. That they were the favored nation by God, but it was also for a purpose. That out of all the families of the earth, they were the ones who would be blessed, but more than that, it was that through them, God would bring his blessing to the whole world. That in them, all the families of the earth would be blessed. And in that word blessed is more than just they're going to do a lot of good in the world or something like that. This is the world will quite literally be changed forever through them. In other words, even though humanity was far from God and deep in sin, God made a promise that he would put back together this shalom shattered world through them. But after centuries of all kinds of trial and hardship, of slavery, in the period of the judges in which nothing seemed to be going right, it seemed like things were falling apart around them. And rather than being favored by God, they felt forgotten by God. They became just as corrupt as the nations around them. And rather than being a blessing to those nations, they are taken over by those nations, conquered by them, and taken off into exile, first under Babylon, and then Persia, and then Greece, and then the Seleucids, and then finally on down to Rome. But during this time of suffering and exile, there was something that they held on to. And that's what everyone needs, right? When God seems distant, we all need something to hold on to, something that reminds us of his purposes and promises for the world. And they had that. That within the times of darkness and disappointment, they had something that renewed their hope and reminded them of what God was doing for them and in them and through them. And that hope was the hope of a king. The hope of a king, but not just any king. This was the king that was promised all the way back in 2 Samuel 7 to David. This was the promised one, the one who would sit on the throne of his father David, the Messiah through whom God would establish his kingdom in the world and begin to put all things back to rights. And it's a beautiful vision. The prophets look at this moment and they begin to reflect on it. That in their hardship, in their trial, they speak these words of hope to the people that imagine and fill in the picture of what this king will be like and what he will do for the people. And this is what they hold on to. And perhaps one of the best examples is in Isaiah. In Isaiah 9 in verse 1, it says this. It says, "Nevertheless, even though things seem broken and dark and hopeless, nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress." In the past, God humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. Now, when Isaiah records these words about what God is doing, he has a very specific moment in mind. It's this transition from Ahaz to Hezekiah, and there's a lot of things that are happening here that reflect that time and place. And yet, within his words, there's not only a reflection on what's happening in that moment, but there's this foreshadowing of what is to come. And while it has a particular meaning for that time and place, it looks forward. And listen to the words of hope that Isaiah speaks, or maybe I should say that the Lord speaks to us through him. It says, "The people that were walking in darkness have seen a great light." Have you ever experienced that? Not just in a metaphorical sense, but literally you're walking outside. Perhaps it's a dark, cloud-covered night and you can't see your way around. Or perhaps you get up in the middle of the night to get a drink of water or something like that, and it's pitch black, and for whatever reason, we never turn on the lights. And you're making your way through, and every step is cautious, and you don't know your way around exactly. And perhaps you even see images of things and you're wondering what exactly is lurking around the corner. And then the light does dawn, the light does come on, and it illuminates whatever is in our path. And whatever was scary for us, perhaps as a kid, is no longer terrifying. The light has come. And he says that's what it's going to be like. You felt like you're walking in darkness and stumbling through life, but there will be light. Those who are living in the land of deep darkness, on them a light has dawned. And he says, you've enlarged the nation and increased their joy. So in the midst of sorrow and pain, joy has come. They rejoice before you as a people rejoice at the harvest. When the good food comes and they celebrate and there's a big Thanksgiving, there's joy as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. When the battle is over and the victory is won, that's the kind of joy that will be found. And he says, for as in the day of Midian's defeat, you've shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be the fuel for the fire. In other words, yes, there's pain and there's suffering, and you've not experienced peace for perhaps many years. But just as the warriors come home knowing that the victory has been won and the war is completely over, and they throw their boots of warfare into the fire and their robes that have been covered in the blood of the enemy, they throw that into the fire knowing that they will need it no more, that there will be peace. And that the yoke that was placed on their backs, the yoke of exile and oppression and hardship and all the trials and challenges of life will be shaken off their shoulders. And why is that? Well, he says, for to us a child is born. To us a son is given. Right? Why will light come in the darkness? Why will there be joy to replace our sorrow? Why will it be that the oppression that we feel will be shaken off our shoulders and that there will be peace on earth? The reason is because a child will be born. A son will be given, and he says the government will be on his shoulders. The kingdom will rest on his back, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And he says, of the greatness of his government, of his rule and reign, and of peace, there will be no end. And he will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. These are the words of hope that Israel held on to. Through whatever challenges they faced, through many years after Isaiah wrote, through many years after the time when they found their way back to Jerusalem and began rebuilding the walls and rebuilding the temple itself, being passed around from nation to nation, from the Greeks to the Seleucids down to the Romans, this is the words that they held on to, the hope of a king, the hope of a child that would be born, on whose shoulders the government, the kingdom of God would rest. The light will dawn, the joy will be restored, the peace will be renewed, righteousness and justice will reign, the king will come. And when he comes, God's kingdom will be established, the promise to Abraham will be fulfilled, and the world that we all experience as broken will finally be made right. And it's a beautiful hope. But if this is what the people were holding on to, then after 400 years of silence, of hearing no voice from heaven, they must have been slowly losing their grip. and slowly losing hope as each generation came and went. The presence and the power and the promises of God must have seemed further and further away. And the question that they must have wondered, at least in the back of their minds, is the question that you and I perhaps often wonder: where's God in all of this? Where's God in all of this? I thought we were the favored nation. I thought that he was with us. I thought that he was going to fulfill the blessing to all the world through us. I thought that the Messiah would come. I thought the kingdom would make all things new, and yet here we are. And where's God in all of this? And that's the moment when heaven came down. That's the moment when Gabriel appeared to Mary. And so getting back to Luke 1, beginning this time in verse 26, it says that in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God. And Gabriel is more than just, it wasn't just a last minute, hey, we need someone to take this news to Mary, so who's volunteering? This is one of the angels who stands in the high council of God. Gabriel is sent to deliver this news. He's sent from God to, it says, a city of Galilee named Nazareth. So perhaps a surprising choice, this backwoods region, but he's sent to Galilee, to a place named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David. And the virgin's name was Mary. So here's how heaven came down to this young Jewish girl named Mary. And we don't know much about Mary, but what we do know is that she doesn't come from some noble or impressive family or background. Instead, she apparently comes from pretty humble roots, the small backwoods region of Galilee, and apparently a sort of a no-name town of Nazareth. And the other thing that we know is that she was a virgin, soon to be married to Joseph, probably around 15 to 18 years old. And I've wondered what Mary was up to that day, Was it a normal day? I guess it was probably a day like any other. She woke up and got ready for the day, and she went to the marketplace and got her nails done and met her friends for lunch, things that are just a normal part of life, right? But surely she had no idea what was coming that day. She had no idea that this angel would appear. And however the day went, Gabriel comes and he says to her, "Greetings, O favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what sort of greeting this might be. All right, I want you to imagine this scene for a moment. The angel Gabriel, to me, seems really pumped. I mean, it's like he has been held back from heaven, just like waiting to deliver this news. God calls on him, he says, go. And he shows up and he says, "Greetings, O favored one, the Lord is with you." You can hear the excitement in his voice. And then evidently, she is troubled, she's frightened, and he, I guess, can see it in her appearance. And it says that while he was excited, she was greatly troubled at this saying and wondered what sort of greeting this might be. She's surprised, she's caught off guard, she's understandably a little bit frightened and confused. And as she wonders what's going on, what this might be, Gabriel recognizes it in her, I guess, facial expression, and he says, "Don't be afraid." Right, so it's like he comes with this exciting news, he shares it, "Greetings of everyone, the Lord is with you." And she's greatly troubled. He can see the expression in her face, and he says, "Well, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid Mary, okay, how do you know my name? For you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, as if you weren't supposed to be afraid. And you shall call his name Jesus, or Yeshua, or Yahweh saves. And perhaps in that moment, Mary began to connect the dots. Maybe in that moment, she began to realize what this might be. But before she can take it all in, before she can catch her breath, the angel continues, he will be great. Not he'll be a great son, he'll make his bed and do the chores and take care of mom when you're older. No, he will be great and be called Son of the Most High God. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David. Not just any throne, but the throne of the one who was to come, the messianic throne, the throne that was promised to the king who would carry the government on his shoulders and bring light and joy and peace to the world. The anointed one through whom God would establish his kingdom and put the world back together. The one who, he continues, will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. And so, what might this be? Mary wonders. Well, it would be a long time before Mary understood what all this meant. But in her wondering, in this moment, which we'll continue to look at in the weeks to come, but in this moment of wondering and questioning, I think we find a few things about what this might be for us, about what this might mean for us today. And the first is this: the Lord has not forgotten you. The Lord has not forgotten you. When heaven came down to Mary, it was a time in which her people, and perhaps Mary herself, felt forgotten. And maybe that's the experience of many people in the room this morning, or at least an experience that we can all relate to this morning. We've all felt forgotten. The plans that we had for life didn't work out. The news burdens us. The day-to-day grind of life makes God feel further and further away and causes us to feel forgotten. We all know what that's like, but I love the way that Mary reflects on this moment in Luke 1 and verse 47 when she says this: my soul, this is her Magnificat, my soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. When God wrote himself into our story, he proved that he is mindful of us, that he sees us in our humble state, that he hears our prayers, and he cares about what we are experiencing. The Lord has not forgotten you. But the second thing I think we see about what this might be for us is the Lord is for you and with you. The Lord is for you and with you. When the angel came to Mary, he said that phrase, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." And this, I think, is what we have a hard time really believing. It's one thing to know that God sees you and hears you, but it's another thing to know and to trust that he is actually for you and with you. Sometimes we have a hard time believing that God actually looks on us with delight, that he favors us, that he's rooting for us, that he is on our side and close beside us, that he is not distant and abstract in some ethereal throne, but he is ever present and near us and with us every step of the way. And it's almost too amazing to believe, but that's why the incarnation, that's why God taking on flesh, that's why this moment of heaven coming down is so important for us. Because when God wrote himself into our story, he proved that he is, in fact, for us. He favors us, he's on our side, and that he is with us. He's with us. But then the last thing that I think we find for us is this. The Lord has not forgotten you. The Lord is for you and with you. But finally, the Lord has sent his King to save you. There's a song that is probably familiar. Maybe you've heard it over the past couple weeks around this time of year. Mary, did you know? And you know kind of how the song goes. Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day walk on water and rule the nations and all these different things? And it's a very reflective song that sort of puts you in a space that try to put you in the shoes of Mary, right? And wonder, what all did she know? What was that like to experience this? And I think to all of it, it is fairly rhetorical, right? Mary had no idea that all of this was to come. Surely Mary could not have known what all this meant. But when the angel came, I do think there's one thing that was made perfectly clear that Mary herself would have immediately seen and realized and rejoiced in that moment, and that is that the King was coming. The King was coming, and everything that meant throughout all of her people's history, everything that meant throughout the Psalms and the prophets, everything that meant in Isaiah 9 is now right within her grasp. Knowing that the King was coming, and not just any king, but the King in whom all her people hoped and in whom was all the hope of the world. And if the King has come, then there is light for the darkness. There is joy in the midst of your pain and sorrow. There is peace in your suffering. There is a wonderful counselor, a mighty God, an everlasting Father, a Prince of Peace, who has come to save you and me. And so when the pages of your life story seem to be all out of sorts, and the time is dark and confusing, and your story seems to be filled with everything but God, remember, the Lord has not forgotten you. The Lord is with you, and the Lord has sent his King to save you, that he has written himself into our story, that heaven came down. If you're here this morning and you've yet to name Christ as your King, we hope that perhaps upon singing these songs and reflecting on the kind of King that Jesus is, that maybe you desire to make him your Lord this morning. One day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is in fact Lord, and what an amazing day that will be. And what hope there is for all of us in that. And we invite you to make that your hope with us as well. But however we can help you this morning, we ask that you come now as together we stand and as we sing.